All right, what's going on? It's Bobby Skinner talking Giants. The Giants fired offensive line coach Bobby Johnson and special teams coordinator Thomas McGaughey. On the flip side, Wink Martindale and Mike Kafka are expected to be back. We'll get into it. Make sure to like and subscribe. Subscribe. The reaction video, subscribe. Bam, bam, bam. We got a full offseason of content coming at you. I want to start with the offensive line coach of Bobby Johnson, right? That to me is the biggest decision. The offensive line coach is your most important position coach in the NFL. Giants offensive line gave up the second most sacks in the NFL history this year. This was the most deserved firing. Honestly, this hiring probably should have never happened in the first place. You know, Andrew Thomas went down this year, and it became the worst unit I've ever seen. Right? And it shouldn't have. It should have been bad, but it shouldn't have been the worst you ever seen. You released Tyree Phillips, right? You know, he has a bad camp. We were there. It was bad. He goes to the Philadelphia Eagles and comes back a much more refined player. Like, that's all the evidence right there, that this guy went and spent 6 weeks on another team's practice squad and became much more of a refined player than he ever did than a year in your care. A whole season, a whole training camp in your care. He became a better player in 6 weeks on a team's practice squad. And you cut him for Matt Peart to be your swing offensive tackle. You put Josh Azudu at offensive tackle because you don't trust Matt Peart. And, you didn't develop Josh Azudu at all, who, you had begged to win that guard spot. And then Evan Neal and John Michael Schmitz. I mean, a top 10 pick and then a second round pick. All of Evan Neal's improvement was in the offseason, whether it was his, getting out of his stance and his contact balance. All the other stuff that you should be improving as his offensive line coach did not get better. His hands got used against him. He did not make real improvement. It's second worst pass blocking efficiency as a rookie. Fifth worst in his second year. John Michael Schmitz regressed through the year. Like, beginning of the season, you saw some bad JMS reps versus some great players, but you saw a lot of good stuff. It got bad towards the end of the year. And on top of that, guys were constantly making mental mistakes. You started Marcus McKeithen over Mark Lewinsky, who couldn't go 3 plays without having the wrong assignment. Evan Neal was blowing blocks like the end of the half versus the Buffalo Bills. Evan Neal just doesn't block the right guy. Protection's not picked up. And Bobby Johnson, which I don't like, talked about how in season we are not developing players. We are preparing them for the next week, the next game, right? Preparing them mentally. We're not developing players. I think that's fucking horseshit. That is what offensive line is about. Yes, assignment and all that stuff matters, but at the end of the day, it's how well can you block the guy in front of you. And Justin Pugh comes in here and he becomes your second best, offensive lineman as far as technique. Technically your second best offensive lineman, even though he's older and was kind of washed up. And then what I think is just as much as an indictment is the running game was pitiful. You have a good running back in Saquon Barkley. He averaged a pitiful 3.9 yards per carry. I mean, if you were comparing Saquon Barkley's year to another year that he had, it'd be 2021 coming off of the torn ACL. Right? It's way closer to those numbers than it is any other numbers in his career. You're 45th out of 48 guys in success rate for Saquon Barkley. Your other backs average 2.6 yards per carry. 64% of Saquon Barkley's games were under 4 yards per carry, the most in his career by far. So this was a bad offensive line coach hiring in the first place. And Buffalo, they did not miss him. They did not think he was advantaged. There was no identity to the run game. And there was a lot of issues and a lot of pressure that Josh Allen had to deal with. But Josh Allen was so great at avoiding sacks that it hid some of the issues. We see guys go, John Feliciano, who's playing well in San Francisco. He did not look good for the Giants last season. So I don't know where they go from this, but you have to treat this look for an offensive line coach like you look for a head coach. Thomas McGaughey, the special teams coordinator, fired after surviving Pat Shurmur, Joe Judge, and 2 years of Dable, who was brought in with Pat Shurmur. The Giants' special teams were never an advantage, and many times they were a disadvantage, right? I mean, look at the first drive of the season. The Cowboys block your field goal, return it for a touchdown, and they were bragging the night before about how they were going to do that, right? Why were they so confident they were going to block a field goal? Because they had a good special teams coordinator who can identify weaknesses and holes and places to attack and take advantage of them. That never happened under Thomas McGaughey, right? The only good thing about the Giants' special teams was Graham Gano making all his field goals in this time. You saw Algic Rosas regress heavily from 2018 to 19 in that time. And Gunnar Olszewski returning one punt for a touchdown where he broke a tackle. To me, though, I have more issue with Brian Dable. This was a lazy hire by Brian Dable. One, he should have always went and hired his own special teams coordinator. And then you hear the story of the process of hiring McGaughey, where they didn't interview anybody else. And halfway through the interview of Thomas McGaughey, he just stops and like, hey, man, do you want the job? Like, it was a lazy hire by Brian Dable. But Thomas McGaughey, guy had constantly had excuses like the wind, would blame 10 men on the field on rookies. There's times where he had 9 guys on the field. Just pitiful special teams coordinator. Never an advantage, many times a disadvantage. With the Wink and Kafka stuff, I don't want to spend too much time on this because I still think there's more resolution to be had. Brian Dable and Joe in the press conference in the season with Joe Shane said, "Hey, I expect those guys to be back." Hasn't met with them, but kept on saying, "Yeah, I expect them to be back." I hope that this isn't a PR move by Brian Dable. Because he hasn't met with them quite yet. And the rumors were that it's more so that Wink and Kafka are the two that want to get out, right? It's not as much on Dable's side, even though there's issues that they would want to get out. So, we'll talk about that later on the pod fully, like why I think these guys should stay. But to me, they're two good coaches, right? We've seen Tyrod operate Kafka's offense and make it more explosive. And again, Tyrod Taylor had one 300-yard game in his entire NFL career, and then he versus the Rams, he had another it was a second 300-yard game. Then he had 297 yards versus the Eagles. So you've seen it become more explosive with Tyrod Taylor and Andrew Thomas out there. I think Andrew Thomas being out really tanked a lot of the season for a lot of guys and exposed a lot of guys and coaches with Bobby Johnson. I think it gave Daniel Jones some issues. But I think Mike Kafka is a good coach. I see guys open on film. We've seen them be able to create explosive. And on the defensive side, Wink Martindale, he does have his flaws. They need to figure out this run defense. But he is a hard defensive coordinator to prepare for. And they've been really good on third downs and the money downs for 2 years. They were 6th in EPA per play versus the pass, since the Buffalo Bills game. And again, they're not flush with talent, right? Their pass rush unit is not very good. Their secondary, like Deonte Banks, I think he had a successful rookie season, but very young. Adore didn't play well this year after playing phenomenal the 2 previous years. So I think that this coaching staff, Wink Martindale, Mike Kafka, know how to get the most out of their players. But again, special teams coordinator had to be gone. Bobby Johnson had to be gone. So we'll see how this process goes. Still to be seen fully on Wink and Kafka, even though it looks like they're back. So appreciate you guys. Make sure to like and subscribe. We'll have a podcast out, within the next 12 hours or so, really flushing this all out and talking about it. Truly appreciate you guys. Like, subscribe, and let's go big.